I'm gonna try and shed some light onto the other situation now, and I'm gonna be honest, this is gonna be kind of a very difficult conversation for me, and I'm sorry that if I cannot convey myself properly. There are a lot of things that have happened, so I apologize that this is not as conclusive as it should be, or if things are out of place in terms of time or missing proper context. So when I first met this person, they were very friendly and we had bonded over games. They kept pushing me to play games, and although I really didn't want to, I eventually agreed because I just wanted to have a good relationship with all of my coworkers. Over time, their behavior really started to shift. I feel like once they felt more comfortable, they began calling me more often, making extremely flirty comments about my appearance, and my voice, and they would often ask me to say specific things or quotes or phrases for them so that they could hear it in my voice. They would bring up my ASMR in a way that made me feel extremely uncomfortable. They would want to call with me more and more. Were acting overly familiar and constantly just putting me down, calling me weird, asking if I was mentally disabled or had Tourette's, and claiming that other at work were uncomfortable around me. It really hurt at the time, but I later found out from another coworker that this wasn't true, and that manipulation and bullying were just a pattern of his. I remember one time we were in call and they just kept repeating, like, why can't you be normal? Why can't you just be normal? And I don't know, as someone who's never really fit in, I feel like it just kind of hit very hard. But during one of these calls, they brought up the idea of meeting up in Japan, and I've always been a shy person, but I also struggle with severe agoraphobia. Even something as simple as going to the grocery store can end in a panic attack for me, which is something that I had already mentioned before. When they suggested meeting up, I kind of explained again that I wouldn't feel comfortable, and I even said that if I were in Japan, I probably wouldn't leave my hotel room. Their response made me kind of uneasy. Instead of respecting the boundary that I had set, they kept pushing, saying that I didn't really seem like that type of person to him. He would continue with things like, what if we were in Japan together? To which I stated, like, regardless of who was with me, I would still feel extremely uncomfortable. They then said, I was in Japan with you and I held your hand. And I told them, like, that wouldn't change how I felt, and they followed up with, what if I hugged you? I repeated that I still wouldn't feel comfortable then, and what I interpreted to be a very flirty tone. They had said, what if we just stay in my hotel room together all day? Sometime after this, I was invited to Japan under the pretense that they had not many people for their event and they really needed me. I later found out that this was completely false. They had more than enough people for the event, and I feel like they were just trying to guilt trip me to try to get me to show up. And thinking about it, I don't think I'm a very smart person. I felt uncomfortable, but I wanted to think the best, and if I was financially able, I probably would have went because I want to be a good coworker. I want to be a good friend, and thinking about like what could have happened. It's honestly something I don't really want to think about. I do a lot. And to continue, I'm gonna try and not share many details here. To try and protect the identity of the other people who were involved, but the same exact behavior, the same offer to fly other people out to Japan, if it meant that they would stay in the same hotel room with them, also happened. At another point, and with another person, they got extremely aggressive with this person for not wanting to meet up with them on a trip. I feel like this behavior to me was extremely uncomfortable. and inappropriate, especially given that we were coworkers and we had around a 10-year age gap between us. I think what maybe seemed like harmless flirting to them felt very invasive and manipulative to me. The way that they would just completely ignore my boundaries and try to kind of blur the line between professional relationships and personal ones made me feel very pressured and just ultimately unsafe. I'm gonna share a clip of a conversation that we had where I basically, after finding out about what my friends had went through, I basically had confronted them about it. I feel like it's kind of weird when you offer to fly girls out, just in general. I'm getting a call.
In general?
Might be famous. I don't know, but don't you think
But it was like a half joke.
I mean, you can't really half joke saying, I'm gonna fly you to Japan, come stay in my hotel. That's not really a joke. Like, I feel like there are some things you should and should not say to someone who is like, because like, she is a really big fan of Neji Sanji. You're on your Liver account. I feel like it's very awkward for her when you're saying, like, even if it's a joke, which I don't think it is. I don't think, like, you say my joke's like unhinged or whatever, but you don't just say, I'm gonna fly you out and you can stay in my hotel room. After we had this specific conversation, we continued to go back and forth on it for a bit, and at one point, they had said something to the effect of, well, your friend is just so nice, and I really couldn't help myself, you know, and I just felt like that kind of hit home for me. I don't think that someone being nice to you is an excuse to push their boundaries, and I don't want to say this lightly, because I do believe that my friend had it much worse than I did, but I don't think being nice is an excuse to sexually harass someone. I think another thing, many people have asked why I post publicly so often, and honestly, it's because it was the only way I ever received any form of response from my job. Every private attempt at communication was met with silence or redirection. I remember at one point, recently actually, they were upset because I had stated I want to stream and said, why didn't you just ask, despite me and others pleading for months upon months for my return. And the only reason any of this even became public was because a friend chose to expose it, because I can't really put it any other way. I was stupid. I had trusted them. I truly considered them a friend, but it came to a point in my relationship where I felt like I had to set boundaries in response to their very abusive behavior, and they weren't happy with that, and they kind of stated that this was a way to get back at me. Looking back, I feel like I realized how naive I was to think that I could just handle it all on my own, but at the time, I felt like I had no one to turn to. My coworkers were already overwhelmed and dealing with plenty of issues, and I didn't want to bring my own issues into the mix and kind of just add more stress.